Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is a landscape tour of a beautiful part shade to full shade landscape in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. This is a very well established landscape. The garden is sloped big time into the back garden, and we're gonna follow a set of steps down there and take a look at it. The trees have been limbed up a lot over the years, and so there is, although we would call this a shade garden, there's enough sun and enough bright light getting in here that some sun-loving things are able to thrive. This area where we're starting the tour is in more sun, and she's taken full advantage of that. And there's a big mix of interesting things out here. There's German iris that will bloom early, larkspur that's just getting going now. There's lots of things for later in the season. There's liatris, foxglove that's already blooming here, and again, it's just this whole space is kind of layered. So as one thing finishes, she can deadhead the flowers on it, and the next thing will be coming up in the middle. There's phlox for later in the season. There's a hibiscus up here that will bloom much later in the season. So just taking great advantage of the small space that's kind of in the full sun out here. If we'll start to move down into the steps that lead us down into the to the back garden there, again, you can see more of the irises. There are boxwoods planted throughout this landscape. There are a lot of boxwoods used, which is what you'll see in a shade garden like this. Is that's one good thing that you can kind of keep year round, that was sun or shade tolerant. And again, throughout this bed, there are layers of things that are coming later. So we have irises, we have daylilies, dianthus. Again, the larkspur is blooming in the back there as well. But just very interesting space. And then this is a great layered garden, because the backdrop to any view that we'll have here will have layered shrubs going up in the back. So there's a Rose of Sharon back here. There's some Nandinas behind those. Who knows how long those have actually been in the ground here. That Rose of Sharon has a trunk on it that's about 4 inches down at the bottom. So it's been here a long time. I love the steps going down. They've painted the treads black, and there's holly ferns planted. So again, what you'll see as a landscape matures, rather than trying to cut on the top of the plants constantly to keep them full at the bottom, experienced gardeners will let these things kind of limb themselves up some and look at it as an opportunity to tuck things up under them. So again, we have the holly fern up here at the top, and then hellebores, which are still blooming. We're in the beginning of May here as I'm shooting this, and so another holly fern. These are Camellia japonicas behind here, and then a dogwood up above that. So you see the layers, coming right down to the ground, and the ground level's covered, the intermediate level's covered, and up here is covered as well. And these things are evergreen, the hellebores and the holly ferns. Again, I'm shooting this right at the beginning of May, and beginning of May is an interesting time here in Raleigh, because a lot of our early flowering shrubs are kind of done, and our very, very early flowering perennials are kind of done. You're planting in new annuals, geraniums as an example here in this container, and they're not necessarily up and going. But she's done a great job of just layering, having succession, in these front beds, so that something's coming in there all the time. Again, more boxwoods down the left-hand side of this path, and again rotating through the holly fern and the hellebores. There's some anemones down below that will bloom later. In the season. There's an azalea. Again, that's an example of something that would have been flowering a couple of weeks ago. These Camellia japonicas would have bloomed January, February, March, into even early April. They wouldn't surprise me if we still saw flower on them here the first week in May. There's some dianthus on the left here. and lots of geraniums in these containers. Here's a rose, and so despite the fact that, again, this is definitely a shade garden, she's getting enough light in here because these trees are older and they've either limbed themselves up or been professionally limbed up. She's getting plenty of light in here to have a rose growing, and several more that we're going to see as we head down the steps here. At the bottom of the first set of steps, she has a knockout rose in a container, and it's looking great. It is leaning this way just a bit because the sun. The way the sun is sneaking in is from over here. This is a Japanese snowball viburnum that's up above it. Looks great. Again, another layer above that with a dogwood. Her dogwoods look fantastic. There's a little wet space right down here below the patio, and there's some flag iris in it. Some Japanese painted ferns, arborvitae fern, just really a neat mix of things, and anemones creeping around here as well. Some daylilies behind it, but again, using a space that was, what am I going to do with this wet area? So we came down the steps from that direction, and then I just showed you where the camera is positioned now. There's a second set of steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 treads coming down, and then there's a path that turns back this direction and leads us around, and it's just, just leads you through the garden beautifully. It's well thought out and well planned. There's a small amount of grass we'll see down here in a minute, but for the most part, it's just made up of layered plantings. And I think somebody with a shade space like this may not think that it's possible to do, something like this, but it is. And I would find a shade garden in your area that's really thought well out and walk through it and see, what you can do in your area that's similar to this. This little space in front of me that's just to the right of these steps has, again, because of this high shade, we've got roses, anemones, we have irises, we have daylilies, we have violas still in full bloom, and there's some violas and pansies down here, and I'm thinking they'll probably last a little longer. In our area, they tend to burn out when we have our first few 90-degree days, especially violas, but because of their using this shade, which would have been sunny in the wintertime for them, I think they'll probably last well into June or even beyond that. A couple other thoughts in a shade garden like this is there are flowers here, there are flowering things here, but it is harder to have flowers in a space like this. And so thinking through the different colors of green, because there are lots of different colors of green, and the textures of the things that you're using in the garden can go a long way to adding, beauty into a space like this without the flowers that you could have in a sunnier space. But that's what's going on here. A lot of this is done with just the color green, and the textures and the shapes of the leaves on the things that are used in this garden. Again, lots and lots of ferns here. Beautiful Japanese painted fern down there below. Cinnamon fern right here. The beautiful variegated Indian holly fern. What a beauty that is. It's several of these in the garden. Basically, she's created a room in the back. This is this material here we call Chapel Hill gravel. I'm sure there's something similar in your area that you can get, but here in Raleigh, we call this Chapel Hill grit, and it makes a great path to walk on. It compacts easily. Some people will use it as a base for bricks and things like that, but others will just use it as a pathway. Azaleas that have just finished flowering. Lots of containers throughout this garden. She's turned a bird bath into a planter with begonias and ferns. It really is a beautiful space. It's a Japanese maple that's been limbed way up, and another smaller Japanese maple in a container right down below it. There are rhododendrons in the back up on this slope, and this is a great place to plant a rhododendron down here in what we would call the flatter part of the state. It's a flatter part of the state. These are native to the western part of North Carolina, but here in our area, people try to put them in flat spaces in the clay. It doesn't go all that well, but she's got a perfect slope up here for them, and so they were well drained originally, and now they're beautiful. So still a few flowers on them. There's some acanthus. Acanthus is just such a great shade perennial. several different acanthus coming up in the landscape. They'll bloom a little later in the season, but again, beautiful texture. There's a quince behind it. It has a few flowers on it because the sun's sneaking in from the other side up there, and then there's ferns going up that slope to the street. I'm sure you've seen by now all the garden art that is out here. That most of these really beautiful gardens that we visit, that's an important part of it. Including this bench and things that are personal to them. There's a handprint in a piece over here. I'm guessing it's a grandchild or something like that. So it's really those pieces are important to this garden as well. There's a hydrangea paniculata here, maybe limelight-like. Don't know what paniculata this is. It's growing nicely. I don't know how many flowers you'll get down here in this much shade on a paniculata, but the plant looks great. And there's a green leaf smoke bush here. So most people are familiar with the purple leaf smoke bush, but this is a green leaf version of it. And it looks great here. It's been pruned back hard. You can prune these really hard in the wintertime. New foliage comes out looking great. Again, lots of ferns in this garden. Another Japanese painted fern, maidenhair fern behind it. I think these are autumn ferns mixed in with the hellebores on this side. A lot of hellebore seedlings coming up too. A lot of these hellebores can get pretty seedy in the landscape. There's a little path going up here. I'm not going to walk you up it, but there's Deutzia, hydrangea, big leaf hydrangeas. Our big leaf hydrangeas got burned pretty badly in a freeze in middle March, and there's an example of it up here where the top 2 feet or so of it died back. She may get a few flowers, but probably not many. And several other evergreen things up here. There's some variegated aucuba, and again, a backdrop with camellias. And there are Camellia sasanquas out here. Camellia sasanquas will bloom in the fall, and then with Camellia japonicas that will bloom up until about now, and there's one we're going to see in just a minute that's actually still flowering. Another thing we frequently see on these shade tours is Cephalotaxis being used, and you can see these are up on this slope. Incredibly drought tolerant shade evergreen, that gives you something through the winter time, and that you don't have to think about watering once they're established. The mulch down below, if we'll lower the camera, she's using the leaf mold probably from the city as mulch out here, and stuff actually is very attractive and does a great job of mulching this space. And of course, it's an inexpensive alternative if your city has that service. As you can see, this is a really beautiful space. There's an exit out of the little room that we were in. There's a weeping Japanese maple here. Something I want to point out, if you want one of these to weep a little closer to the trunk, you can actually tie these branches off carefully down to the ground. So you can hammer something in the ground and tie a string on these and actually get them heading to the ground so that this space could be opened up. Might be a thought here. There's an epimedium that's come back beautifully, and again, it's mixed in with these hellebores and liatris and anemones and so many other things. I don't know if it blooms as well as other epimedium would with a little more light. It's a shade perennial, but might be so shady down here it doesn't bloom a whole lot, but it doesn't need to. Beautiful, beautiful foliage. We haven't seen, notice we're in a shade garden, but we haven't seen any hosta. There's a few coming up, but they're definitely not overused in this space. She's got some begonias that are hardy begonias that are coming back. And the thing about, we all want these hardy begonias to come back, and the ones that do can get a little wild. So there's coming up in the gravel over there and just kind of all over the place. This was a camellia that was cut back to the ground that's coming back from that. There's several peonies in this landscape that are don't bloom quite as well as they probably would if they had a little bit more sun. But again, even the foliage on peonies is beautiful as well. There's some beautiful bleeding hearts down here with a few flowers on them, but the foliage is beautiful. She's got the hardy orchids, Blatilla, in that spot. Again, it's a great foliage plant. And then These are great for the pollinators. I've watched the bees go to them several times in the last few minutes. They're loving those this morning. And then this space just kind of opens up, and you'll see at the end of this, she's got beautiful zoysia sod out there in the sun in the front garden. Back here, there's really no purpose in trying to grow turf back here. I think it would be just, it's just mowed flat to the ground, and whatever's growing is growing. There's a few stepping stones in it here and there, but this is so dark that it would be difficult to have anything flower. Lots of evergreens along that side is in a backdrop. So we've got camellias and magnolias, boxwood, acuba, just, evergreens toward the back. And then we, are going to have hydrangeas, big leaf hydrangeas, native azaleas that would have bloomed a few weeks ago. Camellia, dwarf Camellia sasanqua of some kind, maybe shishi, gasheri, something like that. And then we're in this more open space at that point. Oh, one other thing, the one Camellia japonica that's still blooming is up above us here. So there are thousands of named Camellia japonicas. So I don't know which one this is, but still in flower, and it's very late. Here we are in the first week of May, and still quite a few flowers. Still quite a few flowers on this one. The thing that's creating the high shade back here, there's an incredibly tall native magnolia, and you can see the leaves down here on the ground. This is pretty typical of Magnolia grandiflora this time of year. It will lose some leaves as the new growth is coming out on it, and it's setting flower buds as well. Those flowers are way up there. It's a very, very tall tree, and it's been limbed up. Most of the time you'll see these Magnolia grandifloras branched all the way to the ground. But this one's been limbed so far up and underneath that, we have this layer with the dogwoods. There's a Japanese maple in the back. We have a viburnum, plicatum of some kind that's been limbed up into a small tree. Another dogwood toward the back. It's just beautiful. And then it's layered right down to the ground with ferns and hydrangeas and on that side. And over here on this side, because we're getting a little bit of light through here, she has a mixed perennial border. Some of it shade loving, like a stilby, and then there's actually salvia in here. There's a few roses blooming in here. There's a clematis that was blooming in here. So a real mixed bag of sun and shade perennials because of the high shade. We've made it to the kind of the lowest point in the landscape, and there's some foxgloves. Again, enough sun peeking through here, especially when they needed it, a few weeks ago before the trees leafed out as much. Japanese painted ferns, starting to pick up a few hosta in the landscape at this point. This one's kind of got a bluish foliage on it. There's some azaleas that have been cut back hard, and you can tell these were much, much larger. The trunks are very big on them. At some point they were cut back very hard and are flushing back out now. Azaleas can be hard reset like that. And again, the use of roses down here, they're getting enough light. There's a dawn redwood up above us that's been limbed way, way, way up. And this beautiful, incredibly beautiful bark on this tree. I don't know how tall this one is. I had a dawn redwood at the old house. It reached probably 40 feet tall in 20 years. This one's much taller than that. It's a beautiful tree, and I love the red bark on it. There's a lot of hydrangeas and camellias used again here. And if we come over here, this is an old historic neighborhood in Raleigh. There's a drainage channel through the neighborhood, and that runs all the time. And this was the lady that owns this house now. She's been here for 40 years, I think she said. One other owner before that, they were going to make this out of concrete, the city was, and she convinced them to do this canal out of stone. And it's just, it's really quite attractive and beautiful, and it leads through the neighborhood here. That perennial border that we started in was on the south side of the house. The backyard is actually the east side of the house. The sun's coming up behind the camera now, so now we're looking up what is the north side of the property. She's got up above my head. There's an old holly that's been limbed up into a tree. There's a crepe myrtle that's growing right with it. Both of them are quite tall, and again, everything's being limbed up to try to get some light into this space. We're going to see, up this side, lots more hydrangeas, camellia japonicas, a really nice native azalea that you can see bloomed quite a bit a few weeks back. And again, it's all underplanted with ferns, with hosta that I see in here. There's some irises planted in here. There's a crinum lily. I don't know if it gets quite enough sun to flower, but it looks very vigorous coming out of the ground. More hellebores. It's really pretty dark in this area after everything has leafed out. And the beautiful use of ferns. She's planted some lemon cypress out here. I see a few of them. Here's a camellia japonica that's been limbed up into a small tree. Jack in the pulpit popping up here, and they look great. What a great plant that is, especially in a little dry shaded space. And again, this is leaf mold. This is just leaf compost. It's not quite been composted, but it's on its way. It's been shredded and partially composted. It just makes a great mulch, and it holds together really well. There's a lot of slopes in this space, and so that leaf mold really does a good job of locking in on itself, because it's all different types of materials, that keep it from washing freely off that bank. One other very large crepe myrtle, it's been here for a long time, that's in this bank. It's been limbed up. You can see that cinnamon bark on it. It's likely Natchez. I think she told us when we were walking through that it's white, so I'm assuming that's Natchez because it's got that cinnamon bark. It's got that weeping habit up at the top. That's what it looks like. And again, limbed up to get the high shade in here. When you have a slope like this, the upper part of it is definitely going to be on the drier side. And there's an akuba planted up near the top that's going to work great in dry shade. These hellebores are planted up near the top, going to again work great in shade. As you get down here toward the bottom, the jack in the pulpits and the ferns and other things can be used that don't need wet, but they certainly wouldn't want to be dry as it is up near the top of this bank. One last camellia japonica flower on that one for the season. It's a good looking plant, but it's been there a long time. I can see the trunk in the middle of that plant's 3 inches around, so it's been at some point just cut really hard and reset. A couple other things I'll point out, and then we're just going to walk around this end because it's some repeats, but it's a really beautiful space back there. There were some Spanish bluebells that have been cut back. These would have been blooming blue. Had the little blue flower spikes a couple of weeks ago. There's a sedum here, and I think that most folks would think these ground cover sedums need lots of sun, and they can take lots of sun. But here we are in a very shaded space, and the thing's flowering and doing a great job covering the ground. But as we move around, she's got the bottom lined with ferns, some newly planted hosta. I think this area has kind of been redone more recently. Again, English boxwoods. Container waiting for something to be planted in, but I love this corner. Again, another room in this landscape. Thing about being in Raleigh is, in an old neighborhood, is the English ivy is going to be trying to invade you all the time. She's got it along this channel where the water comes in. I'm sure it's a constant battle to keep it out of here. One other thing to point out here, there's a mock orange flowering right up at the top, and it's not getting a lot of sun, but it's doing a pretty good job of flowering. And up above us, another old dogwood. No, that's a redbud. There's an old redbud that's been limbed way up above us, and then this beautiful Japanese maple as well. Look at the color on that orange coloration on it. And then way up above it, you see another one of these native magnolias that's been limbed way up, and I can see flowers up there. We probably won't be able to tell it on the camera, but it is flowering right now. So this is what we all recognize, as English ivy, the shape of that leaf. But the adult foliage is actually different. And I've pointed this out on several plants over the years. Once we get to the adult foliage stage, you can see a very different shaped leaves form on them, and then they'll flower and unfortunately seed themselves. But it does go through a change. When it's crawling on the ground, crawling up trees, this is the way it looks. When it gets to this adult stage, the foliage is completely different. There's a very steep set of steps that leads you up to the front of the house, which faces west. There's some zoysia turf up there we'll see in just a second. But I don't know how far I am above the camera now. But you would think this crepe myrtle that we showed limbed way up like this, you wouldn't be able to enjoy the flowers. But from the front yard, it only looks like the tree is about 6 or 8 feet tall, maybe 10 feet tall. From down here, you get to see the bark going all the way down to the ground. Same thing with the magnolia. When you're in the front garden up here, it doesn't seem quite as tall as it does down in the bottom. This is outlined again with boxwoods and hellebores, and there's a few irises up here at the top, and it gets sunnier and sunnier the further we come up these steps. The southwest corner of the landscape has Camellia japonicas that have grown up big enough to create a little private space in this front garden. You see the roses. Again, this is zoysia grass out here that looks great in the sunny spot. And then there's a light pole out there. Looks great. And then here's that magnolia we saw from down below. Big, beautiful magnolia. It's shedding like crazy. Again, this is the month that these leaves come off. As I'm talking, old leaves are falling off. New foliage is coming out. Flowers are happening. There's a backdrop of hydrangeas right here. Again, we had some damage this winter. I do see a few flower buds on them, but not as many as we probably would have. And these roses. And you wouldn't know that right here it drops probably 25 feet down here below me. But it's a beautiful space. I've admired this landscape for a long time, and she was outside a week or so ago, and it's always strange to come up and go, "Hey, I love your garden." Of course, immediately when you say gardening, a person lets their relaxes, and she showed us all. She walked us around, and you could tell how much effort that's been put into this space and how much love's been put into this space. Keep in mind, old established trees like this have big giant roots, even out here in the lawn in the front. It's difficult. It's a difficult space to keep, to stay on top of and to have it looking this great year round. So a big thanks to the homeowner for letting us see her beautiful garden, and thank you guys for following along with the channel.